Friday?
What about it?
It's gonna be good.
Oh, they're always good.
I don't know. I have to work.
I'm full of
Watch it
myself
on
today.
TV.
You ready to get started?
That's different from,
Oh. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Budget Reconciliation / Adoption of Millage Work Session. I'm going to kind of go off the agenda a little bit. I'd like for us to go ahead and stand and have prayer and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Bussell, could you lead the prayer, please?
I'm sorry?
Would you lead us in prayer?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask your guidance today as we undertake the county's business. We pray that you will give us the wisdom and the clarity of thought to do what's right by all the competing needs in this county. Go with us and keep us ever within your wisdom. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and at this time, we'll go ahead and turn it over to the county administrator. Ed.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is a different approach to trying to get to reconciliation, but we've worked long and hard since we left you last in June. When we left you in June, the budget was balanced, and I'm pleased to announce it's still balanced.
Good.
On July 1, we received the updated information from the property appraiser about the values of property in the county, and we were almost right with our assumption of a 9% growth in the tax base. It was a little less on the countywide basis, a little more on the unincorporated basis, but we looked at all the other revenues that come into the general fund, and in total, the budget is still balanced. We were able to fund a couple of items. The net budget is up by a little over $400,000. We'll take you through some changes to that. But the big challenge was when we left you last, you had flagged $4 million worth of items. Those $4 million, I think will be up on the screen here shortly. And we've been trying to figure out how do we deal with $4 million. So on page 4 of the document that was presented last Friday is a list of items totaling $2,166,659 that we have found solutions for those issues. And when we visited you yesterday, we asked you to look at those items and see if you concur, because those are proposed changes to your budget. And if you are comfortable with those items, that leaves the remaining items of $2,057,958. You find those on page 21 of the document we delivered last Friday that we still have not been able to find funding for without cuts or without additional revenues. So what I'd like to take you through is a little bit of history. Perhaps we should show that slide with the $2 million. Those items we haven't been able to find funding for include public safety issues of $1,197,000, and some numbers I can't read because the print's too small.
Just think
You need my
people there.
readers.
So we're working on that solution, and we'll present a possibility to you today for how to solve that. But I think it's important to step back in time, because a year ago, about the same time, I think it was July 28th last year, we presented to the board and to the community the fact that in 2018, we were going to have a problem where we had gone through all of our reserves in excess of the 20% reserve. Those are the reserves we referred to for years as the budget stabilization. And we will have consumed all of those reserves, and this is what we tried to avoid, this deficit. At that point in time, the board formed and approved the creation of a budget stabilization committee, a citizens budget stabilization committee. There were 13 members of that. Those folks met for 4.5 months to go over the issues facing the county in funding the needs of the community. At the end of that 4.5 months, they unanimously agreed in two things. First, they agreed that we have a financial problem facing us. Unanimous approval. 13 people from across the county coming together to look at the problem. They studied the board's finances. They met on numerous occasions. They even heard from other county administrators in other counties as to how to deal with budget issues. And at the end, they unanimously recommended, to solve this problem, that the community vote for a half-cent sales tax to solve this problem, as well as the funding of the capital needs, capital repair needs of our infrastructure. From this issue, we moved to today's budget. When we presented the budget to you, we told you that there was $15 million of additional revenue that came in across the board into the tax-supported funds. And I think you've asked me, and we went through this once back in June, but to reiterate, we had $15 million. And people want to know, what did you do with it? We propose funding these items. It's in your package. It's in the material we presented to you last Friday, where we funded public safety, property appraiser, tax collector got his money. We funded raises for the employees. We funded the jail medical. We funded pictometry, base continuation changes. In total, we proposed in this budget to spend out of that 15 million, 7.6 million roughly on new items. What did we do with the 9.7 million? We spent it, but we spent it on things that the reserves were funding today. Let me show you over here. In the current budget that we're in, the 2016 budget, we are spending, reoccurring loss here, $15.9 million, almost $16 million we're spending out of reserves. An example of that is if you make $100 a week, but you spend $116 a week, you're eating into your savings account by $16. At some point in time, you have to stop doing that because the savings account will go away. It's that chart over there. We have to get to the point where current revenues support current expenses. So what we proposed is to take that 9.7 million and fund things that we're currently funding out of reserves. So in the next year's budget, instead of spending 15 million out of reserves, we're proposing we only spend 5 million out of reserves. So we are spending it, but we're spending it on things that we're currently doing, funding current operations. Nothing new. 7 million is on new things that we need to do because of the growing community. 9 million is to stop relying on our savings account, reserves in government speak. Now, what would we propose to do to fund the public safety needs that are the highest priority of this county commission, as you told me yesterday? So we have a proposal that will get us to the finish line. We have 1.9 million that we, in the budget we presented, that will be available still in the savings reserves at the end of 2017. What we would propose is that $1.2 million of public safety needs on page 22, you fund that 1.2 out of this 1.9. That will still leave you positive at the end of 17 by about 700,000.
Let them flip it for you.
And we believe that with the passage of the sales tax, we'll be able to deal with issues going forward in fiscal year 18, 19, and beyond. We think it's prudent because it's our highest priority. We don't think doing a property tax increase is the right way to go. We'd be going back to the well to the same people that are already paying. As a Citizens Committee determined, we've got 1/3 of the people paying 2/3 of the bill, and that's the property taxpayers. the plan is that the sales tax will cover the capital cost that we currently fund out of these operating budgets. And the capital maintenance cost of maintaining the assets of parks and libraries and roads, we would stop funding those issues out of your budget. Those are capital items. And that the operating budget funds the operating portion of the county. As I said months ago, we've been doing what we've been doing for so long, we've come to believe it's right. And that was part of the discussion those other county administrators had with the Citizens Committee. You have to fund capital items out of a capital fund. Don't penalize your operating budget by trying to fund your operations and your capital out of a single fund. You'll shortchange both of them. So we believe that you can get the needed public safety issues that are identified on page 22 funded this year, and that we will make it through the year. We will be supportive and provide any data that the citizens want to know about the sales tax. But this is a critical issue for the community is, what do they want the community to look like 20 years from now? How do we maintain those roads? How do we maintain those parks, those sidewalks, the critical infrastructure that we call home? That's the challenge before us. We think it will work. You spend that $1.2 million on new items, you'll still take $8.4 million, almost 8.5, and apply it towards reducing our reliance on reserves, and the budget will be balanced and you can move forward. I would be happy to answer any questions you have on any of this. My staff is here, the department directors are here, the sheriff is here. I want to thank all of them for being available to answer any questions you might have at this critical juncture. Thank you.
Commissioner Whitmore.
It's really 3 in 1, so let me say all three, and then you, if you could go over this again. And we went over this yesterday in the morning, so. Okay, what does this do to our reserves? Because I know we have this goal of all departments, 20% is the standard. In 18, what does this all do, 2018? And explain it again one more time, simply for the public, that 15 million extra revenue that we received from the property tax increases, and exactly what you're doing one more time, because I really think this is so important that people need to understand it.
Thank you. This proposed plan of financing the government for next year will not impact the 20% reserve. Matter of fact, the 20% reserve does go up because it's got to be 20% of the expenditures, and since the expenditure goes up, that 20% reserve goes up as a result of all this. Secondly, the plan for how we spent the tax money, again, 15 million of new money. We proposed in the original budget to spend $7.6 million on new items, new in 17 that we don't fund in 16. We propose taking the balance and using that to fund things next year that we are already funding this year, but we're funding them this year out of our savings account. To stop the reliance on the savings account, we recommended taking that additional money and using it here to reduce our reliance. In the current year, as I said, we're spending almost $16 million out of the savings account. Next year, we would only spend $5 million. We are putting together a multi-year plan so that we can move forward and fund current operations out of current revenues without a property tax increase. That is the goal in the long run. Short run, it's balance the 17 budget. The long run is to make sure that current revenues support current expenses without a property tax increase.
One more thing, the 32, I read somewhere, I don't remember where, but we're adding in this budget 32 positions, and I know most of them were from, we had a revenue source to pay for those, except now it looks like maybe 3 or 4 where we're getting out of this money that would be tax dollars, just so that we know when that public asks us.
Those items that we recommended on page 4,
Is that what it was?
that $2 million, those flagged items that you looked at during your budget process, and you wanted to have more discussion today about those items, we have a recommended way to solve those. Most of those come from, since we left you last, we have received grant notices. We have other revenues from other sources other than property taxes that can fund those. because they come from other funds other than the general fund. And that list of projects that's identified on that page 4 will not impact the property taxes or this information we provided you today. If you want to do those things we recommend, it's up to you whether you want to do those. And if you want to do those, you would make a motion at some point in time this morning to agree to fund those items, those flagged items, so we can add them to the budget. The other items on page 22, there are additional positions there. They're all public safety related. There are positions in there for 911 call center, and there are positions in there for EMS. Both of those operations are under stress because of the epidemic in the community, and we need to help solve that. As well as there's additional requirements that the sheriff has, and he has suggested some positions in the way of his operations and dispatchers for the sheriff's office, and several other positions. I can't recall those off the top of my head, but those were critical that he advised you that he still needs, and we have been able to fund those out of that $1.2 million. And you can do all of that $1.2 million without impacting your 20% reserve.
Commissioner Benek, I think you're next.
Thank you, and my questions are very similar to Carol's, but so the way I look at this, we're going to spend a little bit more out of our savings account.
Yes.
And so the 2018 question is a little bit
Deeper.
deeper. So without the sales tax, and we've already said the sales tax could replace capital funded
Yes.
items so that there would be more money in the operating budget to take care of these operating budget items that we've had this hole
Absolutely.
for. So without a sales tax in 18, what would be the response? What would we be looking at without a sales tax?
You have options in 18. You can cut spending. You can raise property taxes. You can cut spending,
Yeah, you got two options.
raise
Right
property
now.
taxes. Those are the challenges, because I would think, or you could go in to your 20% reserve.
We would lose our
I would caution against that, but you could.
lose our financial.
We have, as you heard from the county's financial advisors, one of the best credit-rated counties in the state of Florida. We're in the top. AAA rated, AA on our utility side. And we would put that at risk. And that would require future borrowings to have a higher interest rate, and potentially debt service reserve funds to be funded. And we can avoid those today because of the board's credit rating in the eyes of the credit markets on Wall Street. But that is an option, to dip into that. That's the third option.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I ask is someone touched on it, with the increases that we have in staff, with the exception of public safety. And public safety, as we know, is funded through general revenues.
Yes.
It's not a fee-based thing. If only we could get those criminals to pay more, it'd be like great. It'd work out great, but that doesn't happen. So the general revenue funded items, the ones that got hit pretty hard during the recession, were things like the libraries, parks, things that really do contribute to the quality of life. So I know that a lot of folks are saying, well, the sales tax is so regressive. But when I think about where this county might be if we have to make substantial cuts to things like libraries, which, libraries are something that some of our lower income folks depend on. Things like parks that don't have a fee base, that benefit everyone. So I think that's something people need to understand, that when you do make these cuts, we don't make them to the building department because the building department's self-funded.
Yes.
But you do make the cut. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. It is one of the things the Citizens Advisory Board spent an awful lot of time on, because I think some of them came in to the process with the expectation that government is fat, and we'll find the fat, and we'll cut it and declare victory and go home. And as I sat there looking at the data, they realized that during the recession, we took out 25% of the government, 18% of the workforce. And where did that come from? And you start with the fact that the state says that we have to account for things that you normally wouldn't do at home. We have, in the eyes of the overall budget, and remember the budget in county government, I know you all know this, but it's for the citizen purposes. It's not a budget. It's 150 budgets. We have 150 different funds that we have to balance every year, and we get finished balancing each one of those budgets. We add it all together, and then we call it the budget. We ought to put an S on the end. It's budgets. And in those budgets, when you start looking at it from the total standpoint, it's $1.1 billion, almost $1.2 billion. And people think, well, you can find $5 million in $1.2 billion. But then you start, it's an exercise we call peeling the onion. Because you go in and you take out reserves. You can't spend reserves. They're there for specific reasons, and there are specific funds that may not be eligible to fund your operations. But you take out your reserves. Then you take out transfers, because the state makes us count transfers. If I have $1 in my right pocket and I move it to my left pocket, I have $1. Nope, we have $2. If I put it back, I have $3. You take out all that reserves and the transfers, and you get down to what we've talked to you about is the county's net budget. And the net budget, Jan? 500 and some odd-
560 something thousand.
$8 million.
$560 million. So let's continue the discussion. When you continue peeling that onion, take out the utility system, because the utility system is an enterprise operation. Its revenues cover its expenses, it pays for its employees, it pays for its capital and its debt service. You could change that around and not impact any of this. Take out the utility system. As you stated, Commissioner, take out the building department, because that's funded 100% by building fees.
Right.
Take out the development side of the house, because that's paid for by developers. Take out all the impact fees, because the impact fees are in a special fund, can only be used to build impact fee related items.
Right.
And there's more and more and more, and you'll get down to about 300 million.
Yeah.
That's a far cry from 1.1 billion. But let's talk about that 300 million. Let's take out the constitutional officers. That's about half of it. Now you're down to about 150 million. That 150 million funds purchasing, budget, county attorney, board of county commissioners, technology, home office functions that provide services to all those 150 funds. What you get down to after that, I would suggest, are the quality of life issues. Libraries, parks, community services, social services, public works.
Huge.
When we cut 25% of the government and 18% of the workforce, it came from them,
Works, right?
not all those other things. We probably cut way over 25% of those operations. And since we did that cutting in the middle of the recession, we haven't added any of that back yet, because we're still living out of our savings account, so we can't add to the problem. 50,000 plus people have moved into the county since 2007, and we haven't added those people back. Libraries are still struggling. Parks are struggling to keep up. Public Works is certainly struggling. Ron Schulhofer's been in front of you. Public safety, Bob Smith's been in front of you. The challenges at the 911 call center and the challenges in EMS. But we have funded some of that, because public safety is is your number one priority, the sheriff and our public safety operations. So when we offered that to the Citizens Committee, do you want to go back in and cut libraries, parks, social service programs? They said, well, we could, but we'd have to cut all of it to solve the problem. there's not enough money by cutting them. You take out every library or every lifeguard at the beach, close the libraries, you're not going to solve your problems in maintaining your roadway network or your parks over the next 20 years. And you would ruin the quality of life for people in this community that have come to expect parks. They've come to expect libraries. They want our social service programs as a safety net issues. They certainly want public works out there fixing the sidewalks and the curbs and the gutters and the stormwater. So those are the challenges. We offered them, and they said, no thanks. We got a bigger problem than those will solve. I can have that written up and provided to you about that exercise that they found so interesting that we just labeled peeling the onion.
Yeah.
Okay, now I had one other question then. So the sheriff's budget, as was proposed initially before today, was roughly a 5% increase. Do we know kind of what percent increase? And that's what it was. I assume it's close to,
He received 4% for his personnel, and
no, the
then,
total increase in
oh,
budget.
for him,
that
I
it
can
was.
I can calculate
And the
it
reason
for
I
you.
ask this is because there's a lot of misinformation going around.
Boy.
That, that there's never been any increases for the sheriff. Well, since I've been on this board, we've been able to give the increase in property tax revenue, at least a chunk of it, to the sheriff. And I get it. I get it that it's not been enough, that we've been playing catch up for a long time. The sheriff has shown us every year that I've been up here how far behind he is, how they're trying to catch up, how he has problems paying enough to compete with all the other sheriffs. I get that. I get it. But I think it's disingenuous to say, and people are saying it, you haven't given the sheriff anything. I don't think that's true. I'm glad that we have an opportunity, but we need to talk in reality, what this means, doing this. And I applaud the leadership of our chairman. I know this is something that she's fought very hard for, to try to make this budget work. All of us are trying to make this budget
We
work.
all are.
But we have to understand what it means when we do that, because we don't have unlimited revenues. We haven't yet figured out a way to spin sand into gold. We don't have a way to create revenues other than through property tax increases and now potentially the 0.5% increase in the sales tax, which, as I understand it, was recommended because we know we have this shortfall. We're spending out our savings account, and we also have not had a revenue source dedicated for maintenance of these roads and parks. And as I've said, you've got 30,000 acres of preserve lands. Who has 30,000 acres of land and no revenue source to maintain it? That's
It's ludicrous.
pretty irresponsible from even a landowner standpoint. So I just want to make sure that the information's clear, or at least try, because we're going to hear a lot of misinformation.
Since the recession ended a few years back, we're still dependent on our savings account. We could have been out of the weeds, but each year, as property taxes have grown bit by bit each year since the end of the recession, you, as a high priority, have funded public safety. Both the sheriff, EMS, 911, the EOC, but it's never been enough. It's never been enough because we keep reaching into the operating budget and funding capital items. We penalize both sides. When we do that, it's not enough to fund the capital needs, but it's enough damage that we can't fund the operating side fully to the extent we would like to. That's why we have to stop taking money out of the operating side to fund the capital side. And that's what we hope will happen with the passage of a sales tax so that we can get out of the weeds. But the only thing you have funded since the recession is public safety, but it's not enough.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bustle.
Madam Chair, since we had our workshop and discussed items that were flagged, I have been advised that in the veteran services area, there is currently a wait of like 6 weeks for someone to be seen, a client to be seen, which sort of parallels what's going on in the VA, Veterans Administration, federally. And I think we'll all probably admit that that's going to get worse with all the folks returning from Afghanistan and from Iraq and Syria and other places. So I have a question for the county administrator. As I look at the chart over there, after the 1.2 million has been subtracted, there's still 600-some thousand. And would it disrupt or upset anything if we added that $457 for that one additional counselor in the veteran services?
Confession is good for the soul, so I will tell you.
Confession is good for the soul.
That's interesting.
When I visited with Commissioner Bustle
Oh, he knew
last
it
night
was coming.
on this issue, he told me that he was going to request that one decision unit below on page 22, below the public safety that relates to veterans, roughly
51
It's actually page 21, just so you know.
21, that he was going to recommend that be funded today. So late last night, Jan and her folks went in and included that one here.
Oh, it was already done, Larry.
Good.
It was
It's
a
already in there?
surprise.
It's already in
Already
there.
in there.
Happy birthday.
I move that it be approved.
You don't need to, it's voted already.
It was late last night, but Jan's folks are just on
Burning
top
the
of
midnight
everything. I
oil.
told him that he was going to ask to amend the list. So they jumped the gun and they put it in there.
Good.
So we have included the veterans position. Sir,
If necessary, I move that it be approved.
Second that motion.
We don't, well, it's approved now.
What are we moving for? I just want to make sure.
What's
I-
the motion?
he wants to include with the public safety 1.2,
Yeah.
the $50,000 for the veterans position be included in what we're recommending for funding today.
May I, at this point, I don't think we need a motion because it is there.
It's already there.
So we will make a motion down the road to adopt the trim rates, which will,
Okay,
yeah.
fair enough.
Well, can I ask for clarification?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a presented alternative. Do we have to make a motion on this presented alternative? Or are we
I
just
would
saying,
think-
yes, we all agree? How does this work? I'm just not sure.
The budget as it stands today was a budget that we presented on July 15th. I believe it would be appropriate for you to make a motion to adopt those changes that we provided on page 4, as well as adopt the changes that we proposed funding public safety on page
21.
21, and set the millage.
as well as the position related to veterans. A motion that includes
We will later.
funding all of those
Right.
proposed
Yeah.
changes.
Later.
But we do it a little bit
Could
down the
do
road
that.
from.
Is that your motion?
No, we're doing it later.
So
No,
moved.
no, you can
Second.
do that now.
You can do it.
There's a motion on the floor and a second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Bustle and a second by Commissioner Chappie. However, before we vote on that, we do have other commissioners on the board as well as public comment.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Thank you, Larry.
yes, that's, at least the public knows what we're talking about.
I'm next on the list, and you know, I want to say thank you to the administration. I will admit, I do feel that with the world as it is today, with all the law enforcement officers that are being killed in the line of duty when they're working, we have an obligation to make sure that we support our own. And so I thank the county administrator and staff for putting that into the budget, and I don't want to leave out public safety when I say that, because, you know, there's so many factors there that are necessary. You know, the
Chairman,
one,
excuse me,
yes, ma'am,
just to make sure that we had a final vote on that motion.
we haven't
We're gonna
voted.
wait.
We haven't voted yet.
We're going to
yeah.
wait. You know, I had a meeting right after we went on recess with the state attorney, the sheriff-elect, the county administrator, and others, and it turned toward terrorism. It is such a factor in our world as we know it today, and it's something that I think we need to make sure that we are prepared for, and part of being prepared for it is to make sure that the sheriff's department, public safety department, that their needs are met so that they can take care of whatever emergency comes up. So I applaud that moving forward. Mr. Hunsaker, I do have a question. you know, there is a lot of false information out there. It's a political year, as we all know. You know, I've heard some say that, well, you know, the sales tax is ridiculous. You should look at stormwater fees, increasing the millage, instituting a business license. But those really would not give us the monies necessary, would it, to make a big difference?
The Citizens Budget Restructuring Committee looked at every one of those. They looked at the problem of funding the transportation needs. They looked at the problems of funding the maintaining of the parks. They recognized that this board can build an awful lot of new assets for new growth because our impact fees are higher than most counties around. So we can build a lot of new stuff. We just can't take care of it. And the money to maintain the roadway network, the parks network, the libraries, they found that those other revenues wouldn't generate enough money to solve the problem. And the problem is really twofold: taking care of those assets over time and making the budget process sustainable so that we don't have to every year be faced with a property tax increase, so we don't have to be faced every year with implementing another revenue, that we do the sales tax and then we come back with a stormwater fee and then we come back with any of the other revenues that they looked at that are eligible. They wanted a revenue that, if put into place, would make the budget process sustainable so that current expenses can be funded from current revenues without a property tax increase. That was their goal, so they didn't have to come back a year later or 2 years later to look at your financial position. And so they recommended a revenue that would bring in enough money to solve the capital needs of the county. And they wanted a revenue that was restricted to capital. This is statutorily the infrastructure sales surtax. Infrastructure, capital. We can't pay for positions out of this sales tax. We can't fund sheriff's deputies. We can't fund librarians or public works people. This is devoted to capital. But if we take care of our capital needs out of a capital fund, then we stop penalizing the operating budget, and the operating budget should, over time, have enough money to fund sheriff's deputies, librarians, parks people, put back that 18% of the workforce, over 300 positions, that we took out in 2008 and 9.
And just to continue on with this, I mean, the budget, as we know it, it's been being done this way for, was it being done this way when you came?
No.
It was before my day, so I have no clue.
This is a budget process my staff and I devised in another time in another place 30 years ago. It's been in place here since I came here. It's worked well because it's a zero-based budget.
Would you say that one more time? Zero-based?
It is
Some are saying it isn't.
a zero-based budget. Every year, every 2 years,
Yeah.
the departments sit down and they describe, starting with zero, what it is they can do.
Yeah.
They do it in the form of decision units. Some people like to look at line item budgets. For the first 20 years of my career, I looked at line item budgets and I realized that I could never win an argument with the engineers about how many pencils they needed. How do I know? So what I asked them, change the budget process around, instead of numbers, explain to me what I get if you get that many pencils. Plain English. So it's an English-driven process of what do we get for X amount of dollars, and you build on that. That's a base decision unit in our budget process, that if a particular program, pick any one of them, but has 20 positions in it today, we ask them, what's the least number of positions that you can operate with and still meet your minimum requirements to serve the community? They can come back and say 7 positions. 7 positions defined as, if we said we only have enough money for 6, the answer would be, then you ought to eliminate this program because we can't do any good with 6. So they start with the 7 and they describe what the output is. What does the community get for funding 7 positions? And how much do those 7 positions cost? And they go through all the line item budgets. You don't review the line item budgets. Jan and their staff make sure it all adds up, it makes sense, so that when they say it cost $1.1 million for those 7 positions and all their equipment and rent and lease and utility bills, we know that the 1.1 represents those 7 positions. Then they add to that with additional decision units, say 2 more positions. With 2 more positions, I can do this much more. With 3 more positions, I can do this much more. And they build those decision units up till they get to 20. That's their current workload, and that's called the continuation level. They can continue what they're doing today, but here's the cost of doing that. Then they have desired decision units. Because, as I said, 50,000 more people have moved into the community, they say because of the additional demands, if you give me 2 more positions, we can do this much more. And it's all described in great detail. And that's what we take you through in the month of June. But it all starts with 0. You start all over again every 2 years describing what you're doing. And it has worked. It's worked for 30 years. But it's in English, not a bunch of numbers. It's there for the public to see, and it's all published, it's online, and you can see what every program in every department can accomplish with the resources that are given them.
One last thing I'd like to cover too before I pass it on. The 4% that is in the budget for the employees,
Yes.
I want to make sure that I know I'm correct, but I want this to come out. The 4% for the employees is really based on the directors. They look at their employees, they do their
Evaluations.
evaluations, and then they decide how much of an increase in salary that employee will receive. It's not just 4% across the board, is that correct?
No, and I've read that somewhere recently
Yeah,
about the
it's-
across the board. There is no
Performance.
across the board in your operations. We are in the pay for performance.
Right.
Every employee gets an evaluation, and based on that evaluation, they can get a raise from 0 to 5%, averaging 4.
Right.
At the end of the day, they have to average 4. But every employee is based on their evaluation and their contribution to meeting the goals and objectives of this Board of County Commissioners.
Okay.
And it's a detailed agreement at the beginning of the year where the employee and the supervisor agree on a series of goals. So at the end of the year, there shouldn't be any surprises. They pull out what they agreed to, and then they have a chat about how'd we do. And what we really encourage them to do is meet periodically during the year so there are no surprises. But there is no across-the-board increase.
It's really irresponsible, I think, some of the comments that we're hearing, because it's really not fair to the public. They deserve to understand the process and what this budget means and doesn't mean. It's not perfect by any means, but it's a good start.
People might be saying that because they're uninformed.
Exactly.
They see what other governments might do.
Exactly.
But that's not what this government does.
Right. I understand. Thank you. Commissioner Whitmore.
Ed, I got a few things. First of all, the 4%, we're giving it across the board, including to all the constitutionals.
Not
but-
across the board.
No, well, you know what I mean.
Don't say
We're
that.
giving it to every, but we're giving it, including the constitutionals, but they can do whatever they want with it, right? But we're still giving that.
Every entity funded by this Board of County Commissioners will receive 4% of their compensation to distribute however they choose.
Okay.
Under the county administrator, we do pay for performance. I have no idea how the constitutional officers do it, and that's none of my business.
We just
It's
fund
their
it.
business, how they deem to reward their employees.
Okay. I was trying to do the math here about just how many people rode the trolley last year. There was over 500,000. 550, sorry, 550,000. You figure maybe 40,000 of them were actually residents. The rest were all tourists. We have, how many lifeguards do we have? 7 or 10?
That I'm not,
Bob
I'll
Smith?
have to go look.
How many
Bob would
lifeguards do we
know.
have? 14.
Oh, 14 for
That's why they
500.
came today.
Yeah, 510, let's say 10,000 people. And we're short lifeguards, we're short lifeguard stands. This capital monies, if we were freed it up, would be able to pay for the stands. And then the general fund would have to pay for the extra lifeguards that we've actually looked at, and we've talked to the islands about that.
Yes.
Because for people that, just think about this. It's a 7-mile stretch of land, 3 different cities, and you have 550,000 people riding it a year, the trolley. So think how many people are out there using the beaches, so. You mentioned the stormwater fees, the business fees, utility fees. Those are all taxes. Every municipality in Manatee County has one. They all have them. But they're taxes. So for people to say they don't support the sales tax, but yet if they live in any city in Manatee County, they're paying them right now because they all do that.
The property owner.
Property owners, not the visitors, exactly. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you for, I usually, my time when I meet with him is 8 o'clock in the mornings on his way to work. I know when he's in his car. And we usually, if I have any questions, I'll usually call him then. But I know for a fact that you guys worked Friday, you worked all weekend to try to come up with a solution for these commissioners' concerns. And I thank everybody. You worked last night to try to come up with Larry's, the Veteran Services position. So I know this is a rough time for everybody in this department now, but somehow you pulled it out of a hat again, and thank you very much for doing that, Ed. Can you go over again, because this is really complicated, and when we're on TV at least, or when the press is here, at least the public gets educated about the 150 funds. When we get revenues in, it has to have its own fund, and that's why we have 150. But can you explain that for the public in basic English so that they understand? I know your accounting is your world, but I think it's important that they realize why we have separate 150 different so-called budgets.
First of all, we didn't create 150 funds because we'd like to.
Right.
It is mandated by the state. If the state authorizes a county to put into place a revenue, and they don't specify how it's to be spent, we just take that revenue and put it in the general fund with property taxes and fees and charges. But when the state tells us how we have to spend the money, then we create a separate fund so we can account for the revenue and the expenses so we meet the statutory requirement. And that's how we got to 150 different funds. Some of them are bigger than others, but they all have to be accounted for. And once we put money in one fund, we may not be able to move it to another fund. And we, as taxpayers, generally don't understand or wrap our heads around this 150 funds. So what I like to describe it, because you earn a paycheck, you take it home, and you can use it to fund the operating cost of your household, the capital cost, if you need a new refrigerator, debt service, make the car payment, the house payment, and you can spend it however you want. But we have, on occasion, because of these restrictions in statute, we create a fund and we can't move the money. It would be like taking your paycheck home and depositing some money in a house payment account, some money in a food account, some money in a dry cleaning account, some money in for your pharmaceuticals, on and on and on. And once you put it there, you can't move it. So you may have, you've been dieting, you haven't spent all of your food money, and you ran out of money in your dry cleaning account.
Shopping.
You can't move it.
You need to buy new clothes.
And that just baffles people because they can read in the paper on the same page, the county's building a new park. And an article next to it says, and the county's laying off employees. It's like, how can that happen? Well, we have park impact fees that developers pay that will pay the capital cost of building a park. The operating budget that's funding those employees is a different fund, and we ran out of money there. Two different funds, but from a homeowner, a taxpayer standpoint, it's just baffling. You're building something and laying people off, and they don't understand it. It's different funds. It's a challenge for us to balance each one of those, and it can comply with state law.
Thank you.
Commissioner Benak?
Okay, I was going to ask you to state your qualifications, but first I want to make a correction to something you just said. Developers don't pay impact fees.
Thank you. I was going to do that.
Home buyers pay impact fees. When I built my home, I had to write a check. It was specifically in there when I had to write a check for the impact fees and the building permitting fees because the home builder, whether they're a developer or not, will pass that cost on to the home buyer. Which is
Not always.
oh
You had one
Okay.
that did, but some, they bury it in the basic cost of the house, and you never know what the impact fee was,
okay.
or when those building fees were. And when we discussed the impact fees,
If that's the
I
case.
suggested, not to open up a can of worms, that you don't put them higher than 90% of the study in case there's a little glitch. Because earlier in my career, there was a glitch. in a school impact fee. And the courts ruled that we had to give the money back. And then we had to figure out, who do we give the money back to? The home builder or the homeowner? And people started having court battles over that.
Where? Where was that?
Orange
That's
County.
another county in another part of the state.
It's in Florida,
It's in Florida. And so, because of a tiny little glitch,
I think so.
and that's why I thought, don't ever get caught in that. Because if there is a glitch anywhere, and God forbid there's a glitch, but these people that do our impact fee studies are very professional. They've done hundreds and hundreds of these studies. But caution would say, don't go to the 100% number in case there's a 10-cent glitch in there.
And I was going to ask, because some people may not be aware, what makes you an expert in budgeting?
Well,
An expert. Interesting.
I have an accounting degree, undergraduate degree. I have a master's in business administration. And I'm now 48 and a half years of doing this.
I mean, I think it's important because people just don't know, and this stuff is complicated.
I worked at St. Louis County for 10 years, 5 years as a county auditor. Then I was the chief financial officer of an interstate compact authority in the St. Louis area for 10 years. I was 15 years in Hillsborough County managing finances there. 3 years as a county administrator in Osceola County. And I've been here for almost 10 years.
Okay.
And I have an excellent staff of professionals that we double check everything we do.
And the other thing about double checking is that these funds are audited by the clerk's office. We can't spend money unless it goes through the clerk's office. Is that correct?
That's a good question. Yes, that's absolutely true, because I've heard rumors about Ed's got a slush fund and he.
Yeah, I hear it too.
It's the bottom of the elevator somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to tell you, I never get to see any money. I see printouts, but I never get to see any cash. There's no cash. Every dollar that this board appropriates and every dollar that this board spends goes through the finance department and the accounting department of the clerk of the circuit court. The clerk of the circuit court is the comptroller and chief financial officer of the county.
And in terms of our capital.
And they have an independent audit every year by an independent accounting firm required by state statute that comes in here at the close of every fiscal year and renders a report sometime in late December.
I think Neil knows all about
That'd be
that.
new.
He used
Used
to
to
know
be.
about it.
Yeah, that Neil Unruh guy knows something
Yeah.
about all that.
Yeah.
It's going to do it. And I just had one other question about the capital improvement plan because, we have folks that are looking to try to get on the list. I met with Pastor Livingston and the folks yesterday, and they're looking at Washington Park. When are we going to know whether or not there's funding available? And I know Washington Park is complicated because we're dealing with the port and the dirt moving and everything, but, they want to know when they might be able to, we got to figure out what the plan is, what the needs are, and then what the funding responsibilities are of the county. So I said, even though it isn't showing up necessarily today as a funded item, that doesn't mean that we cannot change moving forward in this next year to put something in the capital improvement plan. And I think that's generally true even of our budget. If there's something that needs to be rearranged, even though we adopt a budget, it can be changed
Yes.
in the coming year.
Yes, it is not locked in stone. You have the ability, based on issues in the community, to change the budget. You have on the operating side $1 million in reserve for contingency for unexpected expenditures that come through. On the capital side, you can amend the capital improvement program. If we get a grant that comes in and for a specific capital item, we bring it forward to you. And then you will amend the CIP and appropriate the money, and you can do that at any regular board meeting. And you're absolutely right, with the 88 acres, my staff and I will be visiting with the port staff later this month to get a better handle on all of that. We're looking at that dirt move and when it will move and how it will move so that we can come up with a number. We don't know what number to put in the capital improvement program to say this is the number that will deal with that problem. We know that there's some upland acres that we could put a park on. And we'll be coming back to you before this year is over, I can assure you, with some type of plan for dealing with some portion of that 88 acres. If not all of it, some of it.
Good, thank you. I know that I told him he could contact me at any time and ask the status of it, so I need to be kept up to date, and I know probably the district commissioner is probably in the same situation, so.
I'm actually glad you brought the 88 acres up. I did meet with Reverend Livingston yesterday and the other people that are working with him. And, you know, I know that at one time there was a drawing that was done. I think they had more than one drawing, actually. I'm looking at Charlie back there. You know, I know that we need to kind of figure out where we're going with that so we know. And thank you for making sure that we can bring that back and try and move it forward. And I think it's a great idea that you're meeting with the port, because I think the port and the county has a responsibility to work on that together.
There's a lot of things that were sketched out before the recession, and the recession turned all of that stuff upside down because how long it lasted. But we're revisiting those as we come out of the doldrums of our finances so that we can put forth a plan.
Commissioner DeSapantino.
Yes, thank you for all the hard work you've been doing, and appreciate all that. So I have just a couple quick questions regarding the sheriff's budget. I just want to make sure, I know he and Wells are here, that they have all the funding that they have requested.
This budget, with the proposals today, funds the request of the sheriff in his budget, and I believe you could ask him that when
Okay, and
appropriate.
does that fund the money that he also receives back each year? Is all that, he's
Yes.
whole on everything?
Yes.
And I want to see a head shake, yes, no, in the back? Yes. Okay, so you're cool, okay. In the flagged item list, I just wanted to, so he had dispatchers, SROs, and the FRS increase. Are we doing the SROs as well?
The SROs is a funding issue, not a staffing issue, that the county has historically committed to paying half the cost of the SROs, and this is such playing catch-up with those SROs.
Okay,
It's the $415,000.
that's what we
Yes.
needed to
Yes.
catch up, but going forward, we're not funding it?
Yes, we are.
And the school board is funding their part?
Yes.
It's in their budget? Okay. And,
As far as we know about their budget, but we'll check.
okay. Because if they don't fund it, then we can't fund it.
Right. But they have been funding 100%, and we should have been paying our 50%.
Okay. And just so on your page 21 of your flagged item list, where I see that the veterans thing was added in, are those other items that are in the middle of that page, other than the veterans, they're not going to be funded, correct?
Those are not funded at this point in time. We will continue to evaluate those as the year goes on, and if pressing issues come, we'll bring it back to the board, but we're modifying those. We're looking at alternative ways of dealing with those, and if we don't come up with it, they'll be on a list next spring when we give you a budget.
Because I have concerns that we're not going to fund the extra expanded release for community services and probation and expanded park security. Those two items
Correct.
are concerning to me. Okay, so they're not getting funded. Question regarding our debt service, is that all at fixed levels? Is there anything that is fluctuating?
The overall debt in the county, you have certain payments that you're making each year. The budget includes the debt that's there, and in our projections going forward, any fluctuations that are there, but it's mostly a straight line, flat rate that you're getting.
So
It's very little.
every issue has a fixed rate on it, not,
No. Not all debt is fixed rate debt. We have some variable rate debt in the portfolio.
so that's concerning to me, because if interest rates go up, then we have to address,
We'll be back to talk
spending.
to you about it if we see that happening.
okay. That's that, and last week we had talked about the additional money for the handy bus, so that's gonna come out of Reserves for this 1 year
For
or?
1 year.
It's on page
The handy bus.
Page 4.
That you went through, it's on page 4. And
We've
when it came
recommended
before
funding.
you, you had recommended to take it out of your board's reserve for contingency. The gas tax estimates come out in July, and they came out a little after the July 15th when we turned it in. There's enough to handle that, so your
Very
board
cool.
for reserve can
that one.
maintain where it's at. And that would be our recommendation.
Oh, here
But,
it is.
okay, well, that's very cool. And so, if we can continue or start a, like we had discussed, an outreach program for those that are really in need, for the difference, you'll let us know how the public can help participate, maybe with a donate button on that, or something like that.
We'll be talking to the transit folks about that, and how we
Okay.
could do
I
that.
think we talked about that very thing in our last meeting, did
Okay,
we not?
yeah. And that is it, thank you.
Commissioner Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also had met with Elder Livingston and the residents yesterday here at the Board of County Commission meeting upstairs on the 9th floor. Very interesting conversation. I also had met with the county administrator, and I'm aware of the meetings that he's looking to have with the port. One of the biggest concerns that they had about it is not actually being in the CIP. And so the conversation that you have with the port, would that be addressed during this budget year strictly for the CIP? I'm not looking at the funding aspect of it.
Well, it's really a discussion with the port, and we'll see where the Corps of Engineers are in their plans and their permitting to get the dirt moved. I don't know how long that takes for the Corps to get the permits from whoever it is that delivers those permits on the federal side and the state side to move that dirt. And so the timing is everything. I don't know if it's this fiscal year, next fiscal year. And that's part of the equation. The other part is we have some upland section outside of the hole in the ground that we are talking about the potential of putting some park facility outside of the dirt issue that could accommodate the neighborhood.
Good.
And by the way, it is in the CIP, it's just a non-funded CIP.
Yes.
It is in
Don't
there
know the
now?
dollar
It is
amount.
in there now. I gave him copies of it yesterday.
Not funded.
It's
But
just
we'll
not
be back to you
funded.
to talk about that
though, right?
before the year's over. We'll give you an update on all of that.
Okay, because we've had several presentations by the Army Corps of Engineers at our Port Authority meetings. They had some dates in mind about moving the dirt. They even had an estimate on how many truckloads of dirt it may take. So your staff and the port are working together on these issues.
We'll be working together because if they're going to be moving that dirt, we're going to have some discussion, no doubt, with the city of Palmetto about how many truckloads of dirt are going to go down their city streets to get to.
Well, it will not, it won't go into the city.
Oh, well, I don't
It's
know
strictly
that.
to the county.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would not reach the city boundaries at all.
We just want to be open and communicate to everybody when they start seeing
And there,
hundreds of truckloads coming down their streets.
yeah, and we had that conversation, so I think we may be a little further than you, Mr. County Administrator.
Might be.
Yeah,
A lot of people are.
Yeah, on that specific issue there, because we had that conversation, because we were specific on when they start moving the dirt with the Army Corps of Engineers actually having the ability to get the permit, that also they would need people to haul dirt. You know, eventually, if you're talking about over 3,000 loads of dirt. And so we want to make sure we have the proper information going into the community. So, but I appreciate when you have your meeting that you can inform us on what's taking place.
We will do that.
And
Thank
to
you.
add to what Commissioner Smith just said, I pointed out yesterday, I gave him copies of the CIP actually with it on there. There's two phases. Phase one is $250,000, which is for the initial things that would have to be done, you know, such as a design and so forth. It's a rough estimate. I mean, it could, obviously, that figure's probably going to change. The second one, phase two, is $650,000, which really gets into the nitty-gritty. But I think the county administrator's correct. Right now, we're not sure what the fees, you know, what the amounts will be. So, but it is in the CIP, just not funded.
Thank you.
I don't have anyone else. Oh, wait,
Just one
Commissioner
more.
Whitmore.
Ed, I had a meeting with the sheriff yesterday, and can you just have somebody give us a report on when the freezers are going to be installed? I know we approved it last year's budget, but I have no clue. I didn't know that they weren't installed. It would be kind of nice for us to know so we can act intelligent when somebody asks us.
Let me introduce
But you
you to Charlie
wouldn't think
Bishop.
that anybody was, sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yes, ma'am, that's referred to as the freezer warehouse facility that we're building for the, out of the port. We went through the construction manager at risk process. We hired a architect and an engineer and a contractor, so we expect to be breaking ground soon. I think we're at the last meeting, we're at about 80% plans, so we're still months away from getting to 100% plans. Then we'll be going through the permit process and then putting a shovel in the ground.
So how long does it take to build it?
This one's going to be fairly simple because it's mainly a metal building with the freezers inside, so approximately 6 to 8 months.
Okay, so we still have another year then.
By the end of the year,
A year.
Okay, not the end of,
this year.
Oh,
During
okay.
next fiscal year, it'll be finished.
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And just
Commissioner Burnett, go
a
ahead.
clarification, that is a capital improvement that could potentially have been paid for out of a capital fund if we had had such a thing, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
See, that's the kind of
That's the-
item
that
that could have been
taxpayers
paid
are
out of
paying.
a capital fund, wouldn't have to come out of the operating fund. We wouldn't be in this situation where we have to spend our money in our reserves.
4 million,
It just.
Charlie,
is
what's the
way-
cost of that project?
4 million, I remember. Wasn't it? Oh, of course, everything added to it.
I believe it was around $2.2 million.
That's 4.
But that's $2.2 million that
Still.
would have funded
Yeah.
the operating needs of these departments, but we funded capital because we don't have a capital fund.
Thanks.
And so that, I mean, it's just, we just have to be clear that we're still spending our reserves, and our reserves are a savings account. You cannot rely on a savings account. Look what happened with the money that we had from the sale of the hospital. You spend it all down. Guess what? You got to come up with a new revenue source if you're going to pay for health care. That money got all spent without any real foresight what would happen after that money was all gone.
Please
So
add
that's
that that
the
was done before we were on the board.
And it was done before I was on the board.
Just so.
So it just, I mean,
Yeah.
I think people understand that you have to have a balanced budget. Thank goodness we have to have a balanced budget at the local level.
Right.
But
Where current revenues support current expenses and the capital budget funds capital items.
correct.
It seems so simple, but it's
And that's the
been so hard.
reason for proposing the half % increase in the sales tax. Everybody gets mad when you say half cent because obviously it's not going to cost you half a cent. That'd be no issue. It is an increase from 6.5% to 7% on the sales tax.
Which every other county on the west coast of Florida is at 7%, except Manatee County.
And please add that that would include the school board's half penny being approved. It would
Continue.
bring it up to a total of 7%.
To continue.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I don't have anyone else on the board, so at this time, I'd like to open it to citizens' comments. If there's anyone from the audience that would like to come forward, please do so now. All right, not seeing any, oh, wait, yes, ma'am, come on up.
Hello and good morning.
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 My name is Tara Dennis, and I'm here on behalf of Samoset Community Group, again. Your Neighborhood Services Department assists with revitalizing existing or aging neighborhoods and provides economic development growth throughout the county. It plays major roles in communities such as Samoset, the Southwest Tax Increment Financing Districts in the county, such as Samoset, Cortez, Whitfield, Bay Shore, Pride Park, and Tallahassee, will benefit from economic growth and improvements in infrastructure, and capitalize on public investments by capturing the additional property tax revenue. The voter approval of the tax referendum on November 8th will aid with many of our concerns as citizens, especially public safety, which by installing streetlights will potentially reduce crime, provide safety, and shed light on some of the aesthetics of the community. Street lighting can be used to complement the appearance of our historical district, whereas we can provide a walkable or a bikeable community that is desired. The Samoset Neighborhood Association understands all aspects and potential funding resources that approving the tax referendum will bring, but we want to be assured as a community that Samoset and other neighboring communities will not continue to be left behind with infrastructure needs once the referendum is approved. So essentially, we would like a commitment that the TIF funds available are allocated appropriately and effectively to serve our community and a district that is approximately 25,000 acres and made up of approximately 27,000 parcels. Additionally, we want to be assured that the original budgeted amount of tax revenue generated will stay in the TIF area and not steer toward capital improvement planning dollars and other funds away from the Southwest County. The new proposed net budget of fiscal year 17 was approximately $568 million, within 497,000 increase from the recommended budget. As I understand, there were mandated expenses added to the budget requiring payments to the CRA and 2 TIF districts, Samoset included. So we really want to emphasize the need for streetlights and sidewalks, primarily starting from our community school, which is Samoset Elementary, and branching out so that we can implement programs such as the walking school bus. Since it's up to the county to identify what neighborhoods get authorized for a neighborhood plan, we in Samoset are willing to partner with the county and commit financial resources of the neighborhood. We understand that the TIF neighborhood improvement plans are for the long run, but haven't we in Samoset waited long enough? We hope that moving forward, the existing plan for us can be reconstructed and considered to be authorized for actual work to be done in our community. And again, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public would like to come forward? Catherine, come on.
Catherine Edwards, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Regarding the budget for the sheriff, I've raised questions before regarding the number of helicopters that he's had. He still hasn't adequately addressed how he could acquire 2 helicopters in 1998, a third in 2008, and somehow he only has 2 helicopters. Regarding Clerk of Circuit Court, the database that they have available to the public, while they have some rudimentary efforts underway, still has no ability for taxpayers or users of the database to identify trends. It's drilled down top to bottom only. That's something that needs to be addressed. That's really the only way taxpayers can monitor what's happening in the county. Regarding human resources, the county on the for its budget has always looked at the demands that needed to be met, but from a financial perspective, but they haven't looked at how they could improve government efficiency. From a human resources perspective, I don't know why it's necessary for there to be a human resource department for each constitutional as well as for the county. It just seems like needless duplication. As far as benefits go, that's pretty much consolidated. From a pay raise perspective, human resources can't answer basic questions because they don't have a database that permits them to analyze what employee benefits have been selected at each pay grades by their employees, which is indicative of a county that's managing by budget and not by any kind of data analysis that's available to the county from the Clerk of Circuit Court and Human Resources. The same holds true for payroll. Only the Supervisor of Elections is utilizing Clerk of Circuit Court's payroll department to make payments to employees. All the other constitutionals have their own payroll departments. So it just looks like there's a lot of duplication going on and a lot of efficiencies that could be realized through consolidation that might possibly preclude any necessary sales tax increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public would like to come forward? Not seeing anyone, I'll go ahead and close public comment. That being said, let's say I am the first commissioner on the board. Mr. County Administrator, the TIF was brought up, and I know that we've talked in the past about the TIF funds and how they would be spent and so forth. Do you have a plan on that yet, by chance? We've not seen anything to my knowledge.
We have a plan. It's, the outline of the plan is in the budget. We can have a workshop to talk about details of the plan and projects. Again, the TIF is in the second year of funding. We're building up money in order to be able to do some substantial improvements in the area, but we have sidewalk plans, we have neighborhood plans, and I think maybe appropriate for the board in the next coming months to have a discussion of the TIF and the issues that we're facing in.
I think that's important because we need to kind of look at that and get an idea of how we might want to spend those funds. I don't think we've done that yet, to my knowledge.
Sherry and her staff have been working diligently with the communities, and they've been doing an excellent job of communicating throughout the TIF area. One of the key issues, as you've heard over time, is changing the rules in the Land Development Code to encourage redevelopment of the urban core, because for the most part, our Land Development Code and our comprehensive plan are very well suited for dealing with things east of the interstate and not so helpful to dealing with redevelopment of the urban core.
Sure.
And we will be having those ongoing discussions with the board through the land use process. But outside of that, we have plans for projects within the TIF area, and we'd be happy to have a workshop with the board to discuss
And
those.
one more thing on the TIF. I believe if I understood her correctly, the comment was made about where TIF funds can be spent. They have to be spent in the TIF area. They cannot be spent anywhere else. Is that correct?
Correct, without a board action. This
Correct.
board would have to take an action to move the money.
And that's probably not going to happen. Okay, Commissioner Whitmore.
That was my first comment on that, too. You can only spend it in the boundaries of the TIF. And then we will evaluate the project submitted, and Sherry's department is, and Karen is where we rely heavily on what the, with the neighborhood meetings and the neighborhood's input on what needs to be done. There's Samoset, there's Onika, there's by the mall. That has been since day one why we started the TIF, because those areas seem to get lost. And the CRAs weren't really that big. You had the south and the north, but they didn't cover the areas that we needed to cover. So this TIF is very large for that very reason, because in the first 2 years, I think I saw $1 million in it so far, too.
There's several $1 million in the
Couple
TIF
million now,
fund, and
which we wouldn't
it's-
have had before. And that, but see, that's nothing. And to put a street light, it's 100,000. I mean, so we have to have a plan, get the community input, get grants, whatever we need to complement that. But my idea since day one has always been to spend it in those areas, not more west. I've always been, I always felt that the east was a little bit, needed to have some work. I've heard other plans closer west to spend the TIF monies, but to me, we haven't been able to get projects done in the east part of the South County and over by the mall because the property value. So we have not been able to do redevelopment. So this was a tool to be able to do that. And so far, I still stand by that.
Commissioner Benak.
Yeah, the TIF is an important tool, and I look forward to the discussion. Of course, TIF is not an increase in taxes. A TIF is a capturing of the increase in property values and capturing those revenues to be spent in the area specifically, in that area. So I just want to make sure, because there seemed to be some confusion from some folks what a TIF was. I love that you mentioned walking school bus. Those are programs like neighborhoods working together to coordinate travel to school. It's something that really needs to be looked at, and that T-BARTA has a program to help with those kind of programs. We're gonna see what happens to our traffic once school opens, and we know from the study that's been done through the Central Manatee Network analysis how much school traffic, because everybody's driving their kids to school, how much it affects our
75%.
roads.
Yeah.
And we need to have alternative ways for kids to get to school. So I really love the fact that you mentioned the walking school bus. And I wanted to clarify also on our payroll, doesn't the payroll for the entire county go through the clerk's office?
no.
No?
Oh, what? So I know the check comes from the clerk, so that's why I'm a little confused. You got one saying yes, one saying no.
For the BCC, our function is, our payroll is ran through the clerk's office.
Clerk's office,
Through
that's
our
what I thought.
system, our software system, and
Right.
they develop the checks.
Statutorily, in the state of Florida, the constitutional officers are independently elected. They have the authority to set up the rules and regulations as they deem fit, because that's the way the statutes in the Florida read.
Constitutional.
I should have clarified. I meant the Board of County
BOCC.
Commissioners. Everyone that works under the county administrator gets their check through the clerk's office.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's what I meant.
Again,
Checks anymore. I haven't seen a
Well,
check in
whatever,
years.
yeah, that thing you look at.
all the monies go through the clerk's operation, and all the payroll comes out of the clerk's operation.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dealing with the issue of Ms. Dennis' statement on the CRA, how much money do we have in the CRA?
We,
I mean,
the CRAs,
I'm gonna do
when they
CRA
were,
and the TIF, but we have a CRA with money, but it's no longer a CRA.
right, it's in the general fund.
Line item.
We can provide you a report as to we segregate those dollars within the general fund, and we can provide you a report of the remaining balances that are in the CRA's account and what they're being spent on. We can give you that report.
Yeah, I would like a report on that and see where we're dispersing money, because a lot of times the community is not aware that there is money available there, even though we don't have a CRA, but there's funds there, and how they're being dispersed. Are there issues in the community
Please.
that could be addressed with the CRA funds that may come up?
And the tip.
And also in the TIF district, we've been dispersing money from CRA, I'm aware of.
Well, we have been, but there
The
doesn't.
Line item.
Let's go back in history a bit. The CRAs, when they were disbanded, the remaining money was transferred into the general fund and segregated. And this board agreed to continue to fund those costs that the CRAs were incurring at the time they were disbanded, until such time as the funds were depleted. And then those same costs that were being funded by the CRAs would then be the requirement of the TIF to continue to fund those programs. There wasn't any talk about expanding the programs, but that would be a board decision if you wanted to expand those. But the dollars that were in the TIF are being spent on those projects that were in place when the TIF was eliminated.
But the TIF funds, as right now, we have not used the TIF funds for any specific project in the TIF district.
Oh, yes, we have. Yeah, we have spent TIF money on TIF-related projects. We haven't spent TIF money on any additional projects within the old CRAs that are now part of the TIF.
Well, that's what I'm referring to. That's the question that's being really asked this morning.
But you can. I mean, we have a workshop and the board wants to change things around, you have that ability to do
As I
that.
recall, the CRA monies were put aside to keep funding the sheriff's department, security and cameras
Cameras.
and so forth, and that were in the CRA.
But have we designated the total amount of money for that? What you're saying the CRA did? We have done that?
We have continued to fund what the CRAs were funding when they went away. We haven't stopped that. We have continued to fund every one of those programs at the level required to continue to do what they were doing. We haven't expanded anything. This board hasn't expanded anything. And you haven't been required to use any TIF money to fund those programs yet, because there's still balances in the two CRA subsets in the general fund to continue to fund those programs. And we can take you through all of that when we have a workshop on the TIFs.
Well, I would like a workshop on it to find out what we were funding previously and what we're funding now, and
Sure.
who is it benefiting, who is not benefiting. I understand the money, certain funds going to the sheriff department for patrolling.
Yes.
I realize that, but CRAs are very specific, even though we don't have one. And I'm continuing to hear community issues arising, so I don't know what we were funding before we sunsetted the CRA. So it'd be nice to find out.
Get an
what-
update on all that?
Yeah, update on that.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Commissioner DeSabantino.
Yeah, that's a great topic, and I see Sherry here, because we had modified some hours of the sheriff, and Sherry worked with the sheriff to coordinate that, and they were going to get back to us if they needed any change to the current spending. So I know that they have their plan, and they've been working their plan. So I appreciate that. So they were going to let us know if they needed any additional funding, because we had some events on New Year's, and we reallocated the officers' time. I think we're still doing the road crew, one shift of the road crew, and so when you have the workshop, you'll go into that. And also, when you have the workshop, if you could kind of do an analysis of our current budget, project that out, how many more years the money will last.
We can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then county administrator indicated that before we can make some more changes in the TIF, we need change to the LDC for certain areas. Also, we need changes in the LDC for the affordable housing, and we're all working on that. Just any indication how long in that process will be? That'll be at the workshop, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Which was the budget out first?
You'd be impressed if I knew the answer to that right now.
Commissioners, I am going to say that, we've got a motion and a second on the floor. So perhaps we could now, since we've gotten past public comment, we can go ahead and vote on the motion, get that out of the way, and then we can continue with questions. Is everyone, is that good? All right. Madam Clerk, would you please repeat the motion to us, please?
Certainly. Motion made by Commissioner Bustle, seconded by Commissioner Chappie to adopt the changes provided on page 4, as well as the changes provided for public safety on page 21, as well as the position for veteran services.
Can I ask a quick question?
I bet it's the same one I was going to ask. Go ahead.
We also need to set the millage.
Exactly.
Will that be a separate motion?
That'll be a separate motion.
Okay, thank you.
Then with the motion that we have on the floor, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. It is approved unanimously.
Thank you.
We don't have our.
On the screen, we will put up the millage rates that we would propose to maintain those, and that would be, for those at home, the countywide operating and geo bond issue millage rates would remain the same at 6.4326. The unincorporated MSTU would remain the same at 0.6109. The Palm Air MSTU would remain the same at 0.2546, and that's what we would recommend to incorporate into this budget.
My motion would be to adopt and approve the recommended millage rates.
Second.
As proposed.
Second.
And may I ask you to amend it and say for the county administrator to take on action necessary?
And for the county administrator to take on the action necessary. Thank you.
You second, okay. We have a motion by Commissioner Chappie, a second by Commissioner Bustle. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The millage has been approved.
Move for adjourn.
All right, thank you.
Second.
Commissioner Bustle, you're on the board. Did you have anything to add, sir?
He said,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't
Just
hear
passed
it.
a frivolous motion
He's the one that
to
made the
adjourn.
motion.
Oh, well, no, we can't do that yet. We have-
Seconded.
Was it seconded?
I seconded it, but
No, there ain't going to be a vote.
No, it's,
that's all right.
yeah.
I'll withdraw my second, just because,
No, that's fine.
We have some commissioners on the board.
yes.
Okay. Commissioner Whitmore.
Can you tell the public,
On second thought, I might.
last time we, this millage has been the same for how long now?
10 years, I believe, is the answer.
So we have-
2006, before the recession, was the last change in the millage rate.
And when Ed and I came, the millage was 7.2, 3 or 4, something like that. And then the recession hit, and we went down. So you have an increase in millage for 10 years.
This board has not increased the millage in 10 years.
This is the 10th year, or this is the 11th year?
I think it's the,
I don't know.
10th year. Because 6.
Someone will look that up.
6-8 already sent the millage, and it was 7-something.
I must say, there's been a lot of discussion about it, however.
Well, that's why I think we need to set the record straight. Every municipality has, except for Bradenton Beach, unless they did it this year. Every other governmental entity has raised their millage except for us, and I think Bradenton Beach again, but I don't know if they
Meadow
raised their millage.
Palmetto didn't, no.
According to
In
what I
10
read in the
years.
paper.
In the 10 years,
They
yes.
didn't as
Not
of-
this year.
Okay.
Not last
Last
night, you're
year.
correct.
Yeah.
But in the past 10, they have.
Doesn't mean we have to.
No, I'm not-
Commissioner
I know that, trust
DiSabantino?
me. Regarding the MSTUs, it would be nice to work towards other communities, other areas. We've been talking about this for a while, developing MSTUs for certain areas and working with the neighborhoods to see if they want something similar to what Palm Air has. It's been working for Palm Air for many, many years. It looks beautiful. CDDs out in Lakewood Ranch are basically the same thing. So it would be nice to be able to partner with the different communities. Basically, what we're talking about with Onico and some other areas, everybody has some skin in the game, it just depending upon, and I know you have parameters for the levels of skin in the game. And so I'd like to really commit to working on that, and that's it at the moment. Thank you.
All right, I'm next on the board. I meant to ask this sooner. We did, in the budget that we just voted on, Hidden Harbor Park, I know that that's in there. And John Marble, the renovations, Phase 1, that is in the budget, is that correct?
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure that that was still in there. I hadn't asked her earlier. Commissioner Benak?
Yeah, and I meant to ask this earlier too, the clarification, the dispatchers for increased volume and the 15 EMS float positions was also in what we just did.
Yes, ma'am.
Somehow we had said we weren't funding EMS, and we are funding increases in
yeah.
EMS as well.
Yeah.
3 floaters.
Yeah, which is very important to relieve the stress that those folks are under, so I really appreciate having that come forward. But I don't like spending down reserves. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for an individual's budget to spend their money unless, they know that they're gonna have another source to replenish that. It just doesn't make sense in the long run to do that. So we patched a hole. We had the funding, we patched a hole, but we know we have an issue coming forward. We've got to address that issue. And while I appreciate the ability to have additional tax revenues, it's not going to go on forever. We know that the growth, even in Florida, is cyclical. This is not something that is long-term sustainable. So we got to keep our eyes focused on resolving this problem. And thank goodness that we do live in a community that has a wonderful quality of life. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. We don't want to be the cheapest place to live in the United States. I'm not willing to compete with Texas for that role.
Yeah.
We have a quality of life that we need to continue. We need to make sure that we have the revenue to do so. And we know we can't rely on the increase in property tax value because it's been spelled out for us how that funding is being spent in the coming years, and it will not be there. That is not a sustainable long-term approach. So for everyone that says, oh, you don't need more revenue, you don't need a sales tax, do your homework. All of this information is online. It's very detailed. I really appreciate that. It's not my favorite thing to do. I'm not an accountant, but it is online. It is available. The information's there, it was spelled out, I thought, very clearly today. So where we were able to fund, we know that this community continues to grow. We've heard from our sheriff, and he's done a great job of coming every year and looking very sternly at us and telling us what he needs.
And
He's
rightfully
never,
so.
ever not done that.
Yeah.
And we know that this is not something that's going to go away. We didn't solve this problem for the long term. We're going to continue to have this situation, so we need to look long term how we're going to fund the increase in these services that we're going to need.
Commissioner Whitmire?
Madam Chair, I know we're getting ready to recess, and I just had a comment or a question to ask before we recess on another issue. Is it okay to do it now?
Well, can we finish the budget and then
Oh, I
come
thought
back
he
under
was gonna
commissioner
make it
comments?
Yeah, to adjourn, but yeah, as long as you come back to me.
I will come back to
Thank
you, I
you.
promise. Commissioner Bustle?
Yes, I just wanted to point out, In this book that we've all been provided, on page 27 is a history of all the millage by year.
Thank you,
And since 2006, we've had a constant millage rate.
thank you.
That's not to say we've had a constant tax
Right.
total, and the public needs to understand, millage rate is a rate, it's not the tax. So we're not in charge of how the economy goes up and down, thankfully.
1.4 and it's.
And when the economy goes up and the property values go up, then the taxes go up, because we're keeping our rate the same.
Exactly.
But this is a great book, and I would suggest if it's not already on the budget, on the website, it should be.
It's on the website. And to add to that, the tax revenue received from that millage rate is still 18% below what it was in 2007.
Yeah.
So we maintain the tax rate, but the revenue that we get from that is below 2007.
18% below?
18% below 2007.
And that's easy to say,
It was
18%. Could
7.4.
you give a dollar number on that? Because it's quite significant when you go through the recession on how much
It
we've
was
lost,
670,
there has been lost in the taxable value of property.
Budget was
And you
670,
add on
yeah.
top of that the increase of about 55,000 people in our community over this period of time, and the projections of 5,000 a year coming to Manatee County, you know, we can't continue doing the things as we've done them in the past.
70 million.
My friend Jan here is doing that calculation. If I could rattle that number off, I would, and you'd be impressed.
I just remember the budget was 670 million when I started, which I almost died.
Commissioner DeSabatino.
Yeah, great discussion, and again, what Commissioner Bustle said, although the millage has been constant, property values have gone up and down, so that gives you a different figure each year. And so, yes, it'll be interesting to find out what 18% translates into. On the other side, if in November, our sales tax passes, it's what, 50 plus 1? It's not 60, it's
Yes,
50%
50.
plus 1?
Yes.
Then, you know, we'll have that whole schedule of projects that you have already determined, and a priority list of how we can start addressing that. And on the other side of the coin, if it doesn't, and it fails, then I think we need to get busy right away to determine our strategy with that stabilization fund and address issues actually before next year's budget, so we know that there's not going to be any surprises, and we need to go out into the community ahead of time if in fact things need to be addressed at that time. Thank you.
Regardless.
I
either
might
way.
add that part of the reason the property tax revenues have not come back to where they were in 2007 is during the recession, we, the citizens, residents of this county, celebrated 3 changes to property tax revenue process. It was great as a homeowner taxpayer in the county, not so great to the county government from the revenues perspective. But during the recession, as we all know, the value of properties were reduced, thus reducing our revenue. And while those revenues were down, the 3 things we celebrated was, 1, the doubling of the homestead exemption from $25,000 to $50,000.
I was going to bring that up.
And then there's the Save Our Homes business, where the property, the value, your taxes can't go up by more than 3.3,
Or,
no, 3%, or the Consumer Price Index. And that,
Whichever
in the
is
current year, whichever is lower.
less.
In the current year, that's 0.8. Next year, it goes down to 0.7. So if you own a piece of property that's homesteaded, your taxes can't go up by more than 0.7%. Another great thing for those of us that are homesteaded property tax owners, not so good for the government. And the third item was the allowing portability, where you can take your homestead exemption from one house to the next house to the next. So that's putting an artificial collar, if you will, on property tax revenue growth. So it's going to take a number of years to regain that 18% and get back to where we were in 2007. Because before 2007, property tax revenue came in, and this county none of us were serving here at the time, could fund the operating budgets of the county, meet the needs of the sheriff and public safety. We could fund some capital projects out of property tax revenue, and we put that money away in that rainy day fund, that savings account, to help us during the recession. Those days are gone. Because of these artificial restrictions on the growth, we can't bring in enough money to even, as you've seen today, fund the operating budgets, let alone fund some capital projects, or put money away for a rainy day. And that's the challenge. We've got to not only get current revenues to support current expenses, we ought to be putting some money away for the next recession, because someday there will be one, when we least expect it. But there will be one. It's cyclical. It'll be back. And we need to be prepared to provide for some cushion when that does happen. The question about how much money Commissioner Bussell asked, that's $24 million in revenue that we're below the 2007 level.
What was that again?
24 million.
24 million.
Wow, makes a big
And,
difference.
5 years ago, 4 years ago, it was up around 50,
50-something.
Yes.
some million.
Yes.
Yeah, as the population was still increasing. Much, but
And,
it was still increasing.
and this Board of County Commissioners and the ones that have preceded you were stewards of the public funds to the extent that you reduced spending to meet the revenue requirements without any mid-year emergencies or crises. And during that time, the credit rating agencies, while they were about reducing the credit of most governments, a lot of governments across the country, we actually had our credit rating upgraded because of the way the board has managed the resources and the limited funds that came in. To this board's credit and those that preceded you, that's good news. Some of the debt that we incurred last year, we were able to issue that debt at low interest rates without the requirement to fund debt service reserve funds, which really is remarkable given the financial position we're in. But as Commissioner Benak pointed out, we've got to stop this dependence on dipping in the reserves. And hopefully in the coming year, we'll be able to do that if we get the capital equipment out of the operating budgets.
You know, I'd like to add that I know for Commissioner Benak and myself, we've been on the board now for 4 years, and in looking at this budget every year, I, for one, have been amazed at some of the things that I've realized and seen. And I think it's good that we're trying to make changes this year, and so we can really deal with a lot of the issues that the county is seeing today. Because time does change. You know, time changes all. And this is not the same county that it was 8 years ago when Commissioner DiSabantino came along. So, you know, changes need to be made. I think it's in a positive way that we're looking at them to try and make those changes. It's not going to be perfect, ever. It can't be. But anyway, we are trying to look at our priorities and make sure that we're covering and doing the important things that need to be done. And that's to look at the quality of life and the protection of our citizens. So, not seeing anyone else on the board, I'm going to go back to Commissioner, don't worry, I'm coming.
Oh, you forgot me.
To Commissioner comments, but because of Carol, I'm going to start down with Commissioner Bussell. Commissioner Bussell, you have anything you want to add?
Appreciate the respect.
I'm coming
No.
to you.
No, I have nothing.
I'm saving the best for last.
Yeah, sure.
Commissioner Smith.
Just one thing, Madam Chair, to the county administrator. Are we going to keep all of this information here that we have this morning for our next meeting? And
It's all for you. You keep that information. We have all this information online, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you or your constituents may have.
Okay.
This
all
is
right.
it.
This is it right here.
is it.
Okay.
Okay.
This is it.
And if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to meet with you.
So we continue to study this issue. We have any concerns or issues
Yes.
that we need to address?
You will move from here
public hearing.
Absent any additional budget workshops to your public hearings in September, the 2 required public hearings have been scheduled. They're on your calendars. And we will move to those where you will set the final millage rate that can be no higher than the millage rates that you've adopted today, tentatively adopted today.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Benak.
Yeah, we could go down, but we can't go up.
Correct.
As I understand with the millage rate before the public hearing to adopt it. This budget book, does it have everything that we did today in it?
Yeah, that's why I was asking.
That little addendum with the tabs.
I know that, but this one's bound. I've got it all in my notebook, but I was a little bit confused because we got this and this at
Yeah,
the same
at the same
time,
time.
so.
That was
But
the
I,
weekend.
this is a great document for the public to have, but I want to make sure it has all the most up-to-date information in it.
If I may, we've turned into the clerk per the way the budget runs with the statutes. The budget book in front of you bound does not have the adjustments you just made today. We can do an addendum and put it on our other information is on the web.
We will provide you a memo in short order outlining what it is you did today and how we got to the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, it was all in the documents that we gave us.
Yes.
I've got it in my book, so, but yes, okay, that's great, because I just want to make, again, sure, because there's a lot of questions about the budget, understandably. It's pretty complicated, but this information is very complete, so I think as long as it has what we did today,
Okay.
recommended, it will be even better.
Well, plus you received these 5 pages.
Right, and I
Is
I
that-
put those in my notebook, and everybody has those are online, so people can
We'll
see.
take
but
those
this final
and make a
version would be great.
memo out of them describing how we got to the motion today, so that you have it in a package that's clearly marked and understood. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, yep, that's it.
Commissioner Whitmore.
Thank you. As you all know, last week I had to have a little bit of an emergency procedure, so I wasn't here last Wednesday. And so I emailed Mickey and, because we had the attorneys come around and meet with us about the noise ordinance yesterday. And I sent Mickey a request that could we, because from what I hear from the attorneys and from the staff, nothing was ever, I guess, settled yet. And I asked if we could bring it to another work session. And then I got an email from Mickey saying it was going to a regular meeting, and it sounded to me like, it still needed discussion, so I was gonna ask the commission, did they want to just bring it to another work session? We don't have to wait till the next schedule one, we could have it any time. It's just that, with the information I got, I just didn't feel it was ready to go to a regular meeting yet. That was all. I don't know how the board felt about it. I thought it at least needed another work session, because it sounded like nothing got resolved.
Well, actually, I met with the attorneys yesterday, and I was under the impression that some leadway had been made, and they were looking at everything after they talked to the commissioners to come up with a plan on that.
But I think it needs to come to a work session and tell us what the outcome was, no? I
You
mean,
could
that's
probably
I
meet
just
with
hate doing
them instead.
I did meet with them, but I just hate regular meetings are supposed to be, work sessions are supposed to be hashed out and everything come to a policy or pseudo that you can't vote, so you have to come back. And then regular meetings are to vote on it. So my thoughts were, why can't we go to another work session?
Well, I think, there's been some discussion about the noise ordinance, and one of the things that is out there is we don't have an ordinance we can enforce, either us or the sheriff's
Well, let's have
department.
it soon then,
Now,
work session.
there have been a lot of suggestions, and some of those have been incorporated into it, but if you bring this to a public hearing, like we normally do with ordinances, you can discuss it. You can continue it. If you get to a point where, not everybody can agree in the public hearing, continue it to the next meeting. So, kind of having a work session in public.
Work session the purpose of a work session is not to have it during a formal meeting and work out
Commissioner
whatever.
Whitmore, you might want to have a discussion
I
with
have.
the county attorney on
I
that.
have.
You can still
As soon as
discuss
this morning.
everything in a public hearing that you do in a work session on this ordinance.
You just,
I just can't believe when I'm requesting a work session, I was just summarily told no. But that's okay. I just want to know how the board felt. It's not you, John.
Actually, I don't think this board is telling you that. We
I didn't
all,
say
it's
that.
7 of us, But, we had the workshop. I know that you had a briefing, and it's, I think, something that we're just looking at trying to get completed in a timely fashion so that we're not leaving the sheriff's department any longer than they already have been without an enforceable ordinance. Commissioner Smith?
When is this coming before, in a regular meeting? Because the issue that the Chamber of Commerce brought up, no one has told me that those concerns have been addressed. Is that something that's been addressed and coming in a future document? Because
Yes.
if it's coming to a regular meeting, certainly I want all those issues to be addressed that was kind of recommended by the Chamber, which was some good information and knowledge that we needed to know. From that standpoint, I understand we need a noise ordinance. I get that. I'm concerned, and I've asked the county attorney's office to brief me on what the rush is, because I was concerned about that issue of the noise ordinance. I know they can't enforce something now. That's what I'm being told, because that is unconstitutional, I believe. But what troubles me, and I sent a email to Mickey Palmer, and I believe I have a briefing the 8th, I don't know why it can't be sooner, of the issue that if the noise ordinance is not passed sooner than later, that there could be some issues in it that may affect our law enforcement deputies. That's what concerned me. Number one. The second thing concerned me, if we're passing a noise ordinance to be used as a tool to aid law enforcement, I have an issue with that. So that's why I asked the county attorney to brief me on what's the rush to get this done, and why do law enforcement need it now versus a good noise ordinance to protect everyone in Manatee County. So I'm waiting on that response. I think I have a briefing the 8th. I hope he can move it up. Maybe he can clear that issue up from that standpoint. That's what I was concerned about. And I want to make sure that those issues was addressed. There were some issues I don't want to discuss in a public forum, and I hate to say that. I've shared some of my concerns with some of the county attorneys. So I want to make sure I have the proper information. I support a noise ordinance as long as it's a noise ordinance that protects every citizen in Manatee County, and specifically our businesses that want to invest in the community. Those are my concerns. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of course. Mr. Hunsaker, you have something to add?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I just spoke with Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer advised me that he will be presenting to the board next Tuesday a revised noise ordinance that takes into account the citizen comments from the workshop, as well as the chamber comments from the workshop, and all other comments that were provided to the county attorney, and they will present that to the board on next Tuesday, and request that after the board sees that document, if the board is prepared to move forward with advertising that ordinance for a public hearing. But you will receive a revised ordinance in advance of next Tuesday. You'll receive one, I don't know if it's advance or at next week. I assume it will be in advance of the meeting for you to discuss whether you want to move forward with advertising it. But it will incorporate all the recommendations.
Commissioner Bussell?
I believe that, in all fairness, that at our workshop last week, we saw the results of an awful lot of work put in by our county attorney's office. And quite frankly, without any changes whatsoever, I believe the ordinance that was proposed last week could have passed. I think there probably were enough votes to pass it if we could have voted last week. Nevertheless, I agree that we need to consider the comments that were made, the public comments, and I'm particularly concerned about our board being sort of on the fence as to whether we're going to really seriously encourage our millennials or not. I believe there's a great need to listen to what they're saying, and what is it that motivates them to stay here in Manatee County, to live, not only live and work, but to play here as well. And what is it that encourages them or motivates them to go someplace else for any part of that, for the living and or playing part? I think that we need to probably err on the side of more hours and a little higher noise. And if it becomes a major issue in our community, then we can deal with it then. We can go back and modify it or mitigate it somehow. But quite frankly, I think we're close, and I think that when we get a chance to vote, there will be at least two options that we can choose from. There'll be plenty of opportunity to answer questions, and I don't think there's any need for another workshop, quite frankly. I was just ready back last week to do something, and we need to do something. So that's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Benak?
Yeah, I agree that we need to do something, and it was, it was a pretty active discussion at the work session about issues. There's still clarification that's needed. I still want to know from the chamber, how the question was asked. Because as I said then, I'm not aware that we had a problem with our noise levels being too low, but I want clarification on what the question was asked to the chamber specifically, how they asked the question, do you want more nightlife? And would that take a change in the noise ordinance? If I'm voting on that, shoot, I'm voting yes, I want more nightlife, but is that really, I don't know how the question was asked. So I need clarification on that. I had a very good discussion with the county attorney about making sure that we're looking at best practices. They're working with our consultants that are helping us with the land development code. I think they are working very hard to present alternatives as we asked them to do at the work session. Will it be 100% baked when it comes for us for a public hearing? No, but nothing ever is, nor should it be when we act on it in a public hearing. Maybe we'll have to do a continuance, but I don't see another work session. We got to move this item forward. We basically have one on the books. It's not enforceable, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And, lawmaking is not pretty, can be very messy, and so I'm sure this will continue to be a little bit messy as we go forward. And there are some new things that I know that commissioners raise concerns about when we're talking about ticketing. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Well, we're talking about some of the changes, the ticketing for noises that has never happened before, an automatic ticket if you hear something. I had concerns about that. So I would suggest if you've got concerns to sit down with the county attorney's office. They're working very hard. They understand the concerns, but we need to bring this forward. That's my feeling.
And, saying that, I'm going to piggyback on that for a second. I had a long meeting with the county attorney's office yesterday. Gosh, it seems like it's later in the week. Commissioner Smith, I know some of the things that you brought up in the workshop was discussed in my briefing, and I thought you had some valid points. So, I would suggest that you contact them if you have any other questions. And I'm anxious to see what they do bring forward, because there was a lot of discussion in my meeting about the chamber, about different things that were brought up by commissioners in the workshop that we had. And I think they're looking to try and cover all those bases. Commissioner Smith, did you have anything to add, sir?
Yes, Madam Chair. I think, so next Tuesday, this will be coming before, in a regular meeting, what we're saying.
Yes.
Next Tuesday.
It's my
To
understanding that I
vote
just
to
heard.
set a public hearing.
Right, to set a public hearing.
Well, it can come for the regular hearing with me not knowing what's going to be in it, and I'd be surprised if I vote for a advertisement of it, because I don't know what they're going to put into it. So certainly if it comes to a regular meeting, that's fine. I kind of believe that you should have a good law in the book that really protects everyone. And I do understand the fact that we need one. And Commissioner Benak, I think you're saying you haven't really heard too much, because I really don't think law enforcement been able to enforce too much of anything because it's unconstitutional. So, and I think this is why we have individuals that's calling also complaining about noise. I was in a conversation yesterday, and they asked me the question, say, so Manatee County is going to be Mayberry. with that ordinance. People who want to invest in the community for its business and things like that, if you got something too restrictive that they won't invest into your community, which I believe that also. Most money's made after 10 o'clock at night when you deal with. And also the concept of restaurants and things that can have license and state license to still at 2 o'clock in the morning. So those issues, hopefully, whatever is coming back, that those issues be addressed. I did have a chance to talk to Mayor Shirley Gruber Bryant Saturday, and they're totally, as was mentioned, our workshop is going to yield from this ordinance in the best interest of their cities to do so from that standpoint. So it'll be interesting to see what comes back. Certainly, hopefully, some of my conversations that I addressed with the county attorney before that workshop are addressed. And when I meet with them, I think Monday, maybe it'd be some clarity. I don't know. I hope my questions are answered with him. I certainly don't want to ask these questions in this forum. If I have to, I would do so. Thank you.
Commissioner Whitmore.
My briefing yesterday, our very soft-mannered attorney, Ann, who's very quiet, I guess somebody had a decibel reader there, and she registered 53 or something. And then the other attorney registered in the 60s, which shocked me. And I've always been very, I'm kind of with Larry on this. I'm maybe a little too liberal on noise ordinance. I, as you know, live at the north end of Holmes Beach. My street borders Anna Maria, and I could hear a band that was playing at Holmes Beach City Hall. And I didn't call because I knew they'd stop about 11 or 12, so it didn't bother me. But, and then Holmes Beach years ago, they formed a noise ordinance that if you're standing within 100 feet, you can be in violation if you can hear noise. And as a commissioner, I voted against that, but I got outvoted. So I've always been involved with the noise ordinances. I just had issues with the decibel level, and I know we'll all talk about that in the fees. I felt like maybe the initial ones were a little too high, but you could graduate them up per Florida statute, Ann told me. And so we can talk about that later. I just, I thought, I guess it sounds like everybody was comfortable with everything else except possibly the decibels and the fees. So I guess we'll just talk about that.
That's not the case.
I wasn't there, so I don't know. But you're shaking your head, so obviously it was the fees, but, oh, there's more?
Well, did you get an audio of the workshop?
No.
You might do that.
Yeah.
That's all right. Yeah.
Well, what are the other issues? We're publicly, and that meeting was public. What's the other issue besides those two that I missed?
Let me speak, I'll tell you.
Commissioner
Okay.
Chappie, you want to?
No, I agree with Commissioner Bustle and the other commissioners. I don't think another workshop is all that necessary. I think we're close. I would, if that was a regular meeting, I would have been in favor of voting to advertise with a couple options out there. My really only major concern with the proceedings last at the workshop were procedural.
Right.
And as I explained, and we'll move forward with that at a regular meeting. We will make a decision one way or the other, whether to proceed with advertising or whether to, if it looks too complicated with what's going to be presented to us, and our briefings will cover the bases on what's going to be presented to us before our next meeting. Maybe we will at that time want to have another workshop. But I think the big concern is the constitutionality of our noise ordinance. We haven't. I don't believe we had some major issues with the existing one, except the constitutionality. And from my briefing and from the workshop, it was very clear the attorneys have remedied that with the proposed noise ordinance, the constitutionality of it. They think it will meet law. So that would give our code enforcement officers and the sheriff's department the opportunity to start enforcing that. And to me, that's one of the big concerns. We need to get that forward sooner rather than later. The issues that I voiced where I've had complaints, for the most part, will be, I'm sure, addressed with the land development regulations that we're going through. So I have some comfort there. But noise is a problem in neighborhoods, existing neighborhoods, the older neighborhoods that are not part of HOAs and not part of CDDs, where you might have different rules that you sign on to when you buy into these communities. And that was where my concerns and the complaints that I have received in West Manatee County, West Bradenton, Northwest Bradenton area, and that does concern me about the unintended consequences that happen when we pass certain policies and procedures. And, we don't have to look too far. Tallahassee put us in a world of hurt with their transient rules and regulations that they passed several years ago, and it's changed the whole dynamics of the island communities, and it's coming here.
Oh, you mean
in our
vacation
neighborhoods
rentals.
with larger homes that are for transient and
Vacation.
as I said at the workshop, we don't have anything on the books in Manatee County, and we're starting to get complaints about it.
We're not allowed.
Absolutely, and we're going to have to deal with it sooner or later. The city of Anna Maria is, I think, what was that lawsuit they're trying to settle?
They had
the
50
totals.
Bird Harris lawsuits and 3 of them they had to thin them down and the judge or somebody.
But a big,
limited the third one.
17.
a big part of
50.
a big part of the
Harris.
issue is the noise that's created by this, and that's why it's so important that we cover the bases in whatever action we take in a new noise ordinance. So, thank you very much.
I'm going to intercede there too. And getting back to Commissioner Whitmore, we talked about restaurants, we talked about entertainment districts, we discussed cars, the noise that cars, music from cars.
Freebird playing Red Beetle.
We discussed all those types of things, and we realized that, again, this is not the same Manatee that it was 10 years ago.
Right.
So, I think the county attorney was, we asked him to look at different things to bring it back, and I can tell you from my conversation yesterday with the 2 county attorneys that I met with, they're doing just that. So I think it'll be interesting to see what they present to us on Tuesday. Commissioner Smith.
Yes, Madam Chair. I have asked this question maybe 3 or 4 months ago, the first draft of the ordinance, and no one has yet to tell me where the fees will go to if someone is cited for a ticket. What is the breakup? Who gets what? And so forth from that standpoint. Certainly, I incorporate everything that Mayor Bustle has just stated. My thing is the entertainment, the future entertainment, the millennials, the possibility of us really promoting Pinellas County across the Skyway. And I mentioned that a year before this ordinance came up was taking place with people going over with nightlife. Even FAC had some downtown, was the first time in Florida Association of Counties had meetings downtown because how they revitalized everything. And people were spending money all day, all to about 2 o'clock in the morning down there. They even had a trolley that take you to the restaurants and bring you back. The hotels extended those hours. So I want to be sure we're not sending mixed messages out there when we talk about the urban core and development and getting people to invest into our community. And all of a sudden we got a noise ordinance. People don't invest hundreds and millions of dollars into a community, then all of a sudden they have to deal with those issues. So certainly those are some of my concern from that standpoint. And I'm still waiting to find out where does the money go? If somebody's cited for a ticket, who gets what? What's the breakup of that? No one has yet said it. We've been talking about $250. No one has said how it's going to be dispersed, which I don't support the $250 by the way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Benak.
Yeah, I had some concerns about the fees too, and brought those up in my discussion also in regards to the our redevelopment standards that we're looking at, and that's why I said we need to get input from our land development code writer specialists, because as we look at having more mixed use, more intensity in an area that's got existing neighborhoods, we're going to have standards. We're going to have higher standards. We're going to have to protect the existing residents. If we're going to have more intensity, more density, maybe we have to have higher standards for making sure that businesses can't create noise within certain certain distances. I'm all for creating these districts and having them be more active and responsive to the millennials, but we got to recognize that, that's one of the reasons we have zoning is to control things like noise. And that's why we have in our industrial areas and commercial areas, you have setbacks, you have buffers. So we've got to have those kind of things. as we move forward and looking at that ordinance. And that is something that, you know, we haven't quite nailed all of that down because we don't have those land development code regulations before us. But I did have that discussion, and as I said, our attorney are looking into that and talking with people to make sure they understand how is this done in other places so they don't discourage entertainment districts, so.
I think they're going to bring a report actually on that very thing Tuesday, it's my understanding. Well, I don't have anyone else on the board, so Commissioner Whitmore, did you have anything else?
No, that was enough.
That's why I was waiting to go last, I knew. Commissioner DeSabantino?
Good.
Commissioner Chappie?
Oh, I'm good. Meeting's adjourned.
The only thing that I would add is that we do have a depression out in the Gulf. It looks like we might be hearing very soon. They're expecting it to be a tropical storm, Earl. So just keep your eyes on it and stay aware.
It's going to Texas, right?
Go south.
That's what it said on the news.
What I
south,
saw
Earl,
this
go
morning,
south.
it didn't look like it
It's
was
not coming
really,
to us.
no, but it,
Oh, okay.
you know, they do change. But no, it
Caribbean,
didn't look
not
like
the
it was
Gulf.
going to Texas
Yeah,
now.
Caribbean.
Well, with nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.